The knavery of slavery. Second World War and communist states. With the declared goal of treating these untermenschen, subhumans, as a permanent slave class of inferior beings who could be worked until they died, and who lacked the rights and legal standing of members of the Aryan race. Nazi Germany effectively enslaved about 12 million people during World War II, including both citizens of conquered nations and those deemed undesirable. The inhabitants of Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia were subjected to the most severe deportation and forced labor practices, in addition to Jews. Half of Belarus' population had been slain or deported at the end of the war. The Soviet Union established a system of slave labor camps known as the Gulag between 1930 and 1960. A combination of severe output quotas, physical and psychological abuse, malnutrition, a lack of access to health care, and the hostile surroundings caused prisoners in these camps to be worked to death. After surviving 8 years of imprisonment in the Gulag, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was granted the Nobel Prize in Literature for his book The Gulag Archipelago, which included personal accounts of the camps. In many camps, the death rate during the first few months reached 80%. The Soviets' use of forced labor directly resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Golfo Alexopoulos highlights the violence of human exploitation of the Gulag and advises connecting it to other forms of slave labor, in illness and inhumanity in Stalin's Gulag. In many respects, Stalin's Gulag was more of a forced labor camp than a concentration camp, and it was more of a system of slavery than a jail. The Gulag memoir literature frequently depicts the slave. We leaned into a horse collar, raising blood blisters on our chests and pulling a stone-filled cart up the slanted mine floor, exhausted and hungry. Varlam Shalamov wrote, "The ancient Egyptians used the same collar a long time ago. I believe that scholarly attention should be paid to careful and thorough historical comparisons between Soviet forced labor and other types of slave labor. Because, similar to the situation of global slavery, the Gulag was justified by a complex narrative of difference that included blame and the assumption of danger. In modern-day Russia, the savagery of human exploitation and this idea of difference have left enduring effects." In her book, Gulag's Introduction, historian Anne Applebaum states that the term Gulag has come to stand for the system of Soviet slave labor itself, in all its forms and varieties. Gulag is an acronym for the Main Camp Administration, also known as Glavno Upravlenie Lagerai, which was in charge of the Soviet camps. The term has, however, also come to refer to the Soviet system of slave labor in all of its manifestations and variations, including labor camps, punishment camps, political and criminal camps, women's camps, children's camps, and transit camps. More widely, Gulag has come to refer to the Soviet repressive system itself, this series of practices that Alexander Solzhenitsyn once referred to as our meat grinder, the forced labor, the forced transportation in unheated cattle cars, the arrests, the interrogations, the years of exile, the early and needless deaths, and the destruction of families.